Welcome back, panelists, and thank you for your participation and engagement throughout session 8. The presence and active engagement have been invaluable to the success of this event. We really appreciate the time, insight, and expertise shared by each of you. This has enriched this session to shed light on the critical topic of Guam's war on drugs. We'll now move on to session B, which will cover questions 6 through 10. As a reminder, each panelist will have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question. To start off session B, we'll begin with Senator Chris Barnett. Question 6. What role does corruption or insufficient resources play in hindering drug enforcement efforts in Guam?
Thank you for that question and welcome back. I think it plays a role. I think that we would see more progress with some of our law enforcement efforts and taking down, again, not the street level users, but the organized crime elements that are distributing and importing methamphetamine at a large scale. And, I'll just tell you guys, this is something that I really researched when I was a member of the media. And I don't think a lot of people know that there are connections between some of the alleged major drug trafficking organizations on Guam, and those connections run to the highest levels of our government. And when you have, calling it corruption outright, I don't know if I necessarily want to do that, but because of our cultural issues, a lot of times it compromises people's ability to do the right thing. For example, if your cousin is a major drug kingpin, you might not be so willing to inform on that or, turn them in. And I think that, in combination with corruption, has really prevented law enforcement from taking down some of these major drug trafficking organizations. I had a big hearing when I first took office last year, and I was interviewing the former head of the Criminal Investigation Division, and it was unfortunate because I asked the chief how many major drug trafficking organizations do we have on Guam, and he said about a handful, which is, for me, it's a handful too many. And then I had asked the former head of CID, just based on people's perception, because like I said earlier, Guam's a small community. I think we all have a good idea of, and I'm not saying rumor is fact, but a lot of times on Guam, rumor eventually is revealed to be fact. But we have a good idea of who is trafficking these drugs, and they use these proceeds to start legitimate businesses. And so, with that being said, I think a lot of times where law enforcement struggles is getting the information, and what I heard from the former CID was that they've basically been outsmarted by these major drug trafficking organizations. And I think the response I got was, they know their constitutional rights, which is, for me, it just goes to show that we need more of a concerted effort. I think for so long on Guam, our lean with drugs and the drug epidemic, and again, we haven't seen anything like meth at all, but our lean as a government, a local government, has been to kind of wait for the feds to come in and wait for the feds to come in and take care of things. And, the feds got a lot of responsibilities. And, you hear from Mr. Ramirez, who represents federal HSI, and even he says that he's got a small office. So, and we see this also with the HITA. We've been applying to become a high-intensity drug trafficking area every which way we can. We've applied by ourselves. We tried applying with Saipan. We tried saying, put Hawaii with Saipan, put all of us together. But just for me, it's a real reality check. As bad as the crystal meth is here on Guam, where we see the crime, the breakdown of the family, it hasn't yet triggered a substantive federal response. Granted, we do have federal presence here, but HSI, the Border Enforcement Security Team, doesn't just target specifically drugs, it also targets immigration, I believe, right? And so I think we have to get away from sitting back and waiting for the feds to swoop in, save the day, and look for more collaborative efforts, and also to do our part locally. And I know the Guam Police Department is working very hard on the multiple aspects. So you have the interdiction, enforcement, prevention, education, and awareness. And if we're not doing any one of these areas adequately, then it's just not going to work. And if we're not doing any of them good enough, obviously we're going to see kind of what we're seeing. today. So I think with the legislature, this is part of why I argued that we needed to stiffen our penalties, was because, you know, I think gone are the days where we can rely on the federal government to break down these drug trafficking organizations, and instead of kind of waiting for them to do it, we got to really be assertive and take action ourselves, because the many times that we've tried to get federal assistance, whether it's through HITA or the HSI, which, you know, I'm very grateful for the border enforcement security team. We just haven't seen, I think, the response that we need, because, like I said, the federal government, they've got a lot of things that they're working on. See those responses.
Yes, corruption is a big issue. And yes, it does hamper the Guam Police Department's ability to enforce. So I'm sure everyone obviously has tracked the news, you know, about police officers that were, you know, being federally, you know, investigated in the past. And of course, public trust is one of the biggest factors of us doing our jobs the way we're supposed to. How can we do our jobs efficiently and effectively if we don't have the public's trust, right? So that's the main issue that we probably gonna have to be dealing with, is, you know, the public's trust. We are the enforcers of laws, right? If we can't be trusted by the public to enforce the laws, especially when it comes to drugs, where there's a lot of influence, right, to make easy money, right? We see this in detective movies, you know, we see it out there. And, it's no secret, right, that it's very easy, you know, to take that way out, you know, and make easy money, and then to earn a living, you know, like we're supposed to. So the public's trust is very important to us, and we understand that. And but I can assure you that with the Guam Police Department right now, with my leadership, that you will have none of that. Okay, and we will do our due diligence and everything that we can to make sure that we clean up the streets and we gain the public's trust and we prevent public fear from crimes related to drugs. Thank you.
So we have the distinction of corruption versus insufficient resources. In law enforcement, we're the ones that have to go out there in the field, i.e. the police officers, customs, whoever it is. Because of the drug world and the amount of money that we're talking, and this isn't just on Guam, but throughout the entire nation, you've got corruption tied with money, tied with tax evasion, tied with money laundering, because that's illegal money that they're getting. The feds passed the RICO Act, which is the Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations, in order to get around how the drug addicts, the drug dealers actually, are taking that money and turning it into legitimate money so that they can benefit from that money. The idea of corruption also goes down to the beat cop. Nobody wants a partner that's going to put a bullet in the back of their head. And that's literally what you're dealing with when you're dealing with drugs. They have no problem killing people off. We're seeing it monthly in our newspapers, in what GPD is investigating. Death surrounds drugs, literally. And whether you're on the other side of it, where you're a law enforcer that has to worry about your partner being paid out and that you could be sold out, or an informant in the AG's office having a bad prosecutor in there or investigator that is leaking information to the drug dealers, the danger of money is death, is the idea that the process is corrupt. Insufficient resources, Guam is even more accented by that because we don't have enough lawyers on Guam. So I've been bringing people from off-island, prosecutors from off-island, but that's a struggle to train them, to find the good ones. And I was told by our National Association of AGs that nationwide, there's not enough prosecutors for whatever reason. That's what I was being informed. Back in the 1990s, they were graduating lawyers, LA law. It was very hip to be a lawyer. Now, it's not as attractive for a lot of people to be lawyers. That's my impression. Not as much lawyers in the community, which hurts us as law enforcement. The police do their job, they bring the cases to us. We have to actually put it together and have that case prosecuted through the criminal justice system. So, but again, I don't like excuses. We're thinking outside the box. We need to do that as a community. Thank you.
Well, in terms of the question, obviously, I defer to the law enforcement arm of the criminal justice system on these particular topics. But obviously, insufficient resources are hindering all kinds of responses to crime on the law. I just recently had a trial, so this is public information. And what was testified to at that trial was that at that particular shift that officers responded to from Toronto to the precinct, there were more than half of the 6 who were on for that shift were already, there. So all the resources that Toronto Community Precinct had were dedicated to this one particular traffic stop. So, that is a huge, has a huge impact on how officers are able to respond to your burglaries, to your CSC, criminal sexual conduct cases, to your assaults, to even garden variety traffic accidents, right? So the resources are definitely strained. So I can't speak as to corruption part, obviously that would have an impact on it. But in terms of insufficient resources, and I know that and the executive branch are working towards increasing their numbers, and thankfully so. And so hopefully that will be able to dedicate some more time, some more manpower to addressing the crisis of drugs on Guam.
So as the said, it really is a two-part question, right, that go hand in hand. You have corruption and insufficient resources. And resources are really important especially in the technology aspect, because it's such a force multiplier. If you don't have the people, but you have the technology, it helps in identifying whatever you're trying to accomplish. Like, for example, if you're trying to drug addiction, well, technology helps us to identify where the drugs might be coming from, who might be bringing them in, who might be sending out the money. All aspects of that are important. So if you don't have those resources, then you have to have the manpower to do it, manually, and we don't have that either. So they kind of go hand in hand. And the whole process of drug interdiction is really, identifying, inspecting, interdicting, and then presenting for prosecution. And the way corruption affects that is, if any part of that process is broken down, then you mess up the whole process. And that could be as simple as, like Senator Barnett said, a cousin saying something or not saying something, or not helping the process, or, refusing to cooperate, or somebody higher up, protecting that shipment or not providing the information to law enforcement. Any part of that process that gets broken down affects the whole investigation, and it's time consuming, it's manpower consuming, that's what I'm saying. They kind of go hand in hand. And corruption always, while it could be high level, mid level, low level, any part of that affects an investigation, because the process has to be clean. It almost always has to be perfect, and so resources have that availability to help. But if you have corruption playing into it, then you break down the whole process.
Well, I'm not really going to address the issue of corruption. Everyone's addressed that already. I think for what we see is the insufficient resources really for, especially the Department of Corrections. There's an emergency going on over there. It's going to be a human rights issue at some point. There are like 950 people detained in prison right now. 2 years ago, there were 620. So we have 301 people in jail, right? And really, the more people you have in jail, with the limited resources that DOC already had, they're not getting any kind of treatment that they need. And they're not, like, RSAT has not tripled its size. There's not other programs being provided. We're basically just housing people, like 4 to 6 people in a cell, right? And so that's fine and good as long as they're there, but they're going to get out. And when you treat people like animals, what happens when they're released, right? If they're not given the tools to succeed when they get out, then we're gonna, we're pushing down the problem, 2 or 3 years down the line. And so I think we really need to address how are we gonna help our brothers and sisters as they transition from prison, back to, regular life in the 2 or 3 years, so we still have that in the center. But yeah, so insufficient resources, if that's GP, and, pretty much everyone here, the AG's office, our office, the courts, but really, we want to prevent recidivism. We really need to take care of the 950 people who are currently detained, and most of them are eventually going to get out.
Thank you, panelists, for your thoughtful responses. We will now like to move on to the seventh question for session B. We would like to start with Colonel Carbolito. Colonel Carbolito, here is the seventh question. What have you learned about fentanyl, and how has Guam prepared for the recent introduction to fentanyl on our island?
Thank you for that question. So we've already postured long time for this drug choice to enter our island. And although we haven't had that many like we expected to come in, I mentioned the data earlier. Based on the data with, in collaboration with federal partners that we have, we've already seized about 200 plus pills of fentanyl. And we've had, I believe, 3 up to date in 2024 overdose regarding fentanyl. And there are probably more incidents that are undocumented or unreported. The data probably doesn't reveal that because it's not reported to the Guam Police Department. But we've postured for it. We've already got our police officers with an actual policy on how to respond to fentanyl incidents. And I mentioned it earlier. We made sure that our police officers don't touch the drug. They're supposed to be geared up with PPEs, and that includes, the protective mask that's required, because if you don't know this drug, it's deadly. Okay, I'm just making that absolutely clear out there to the audience, especially the young audience. Okay, you don't touch this drug, you don't sniff it like any other drug. Okay, because once you get this on you, even a speck of this drug on you, you can die from it. Okay, straight up. I'm letting you know that. So we're protecting our officers when they respond out there and making sure that they don't touch the drug, they don't smell it, they don't even try to test it. It goes straight from the streets. It's confiscated by our crime lab officers that are trained, and it's taken to the lab for analysis, for confirmation. So there's a policy in place for the Guam Police Department, and there's an awareness campaign that's out there with our community affairs unit, as far as outreach to the community to let them know the deadly consequences of this drug. Thank you.
So the drug fentanyl, luckily, since I've been in office and even before, it hasn't hit Guam like it has in the States. And quite frankly, it's against the drug dealers' behavior, their business model, to have fentanyl, because nobody's been able to control the deadliness of fentanyl. It's a drug that's, I guess, used by surgeons, and it has its effect. It's a good drug when used properly by the medical professionals. Again, luckily, even Dr. Nine had indicated there wasn't any real incidence of it. But if the drug dealers were to use it, it's also against their their business model because you're gonna kill your customers. Drug dealers don't want to kill their customers. They want subscribers, right? That's the world we live in. Everybody wants to put you on a monthly subscription so that you can keep funneling the money to them. So I see the system is almost self-regulating. The legislature has passed many laws that I've been sitting in these public hearings on with GPD to provide the Narcan kits, these immediate types of medications, not only for the victim, the family member, the friends, as well as the police officers that have to investigate it and are touching it, as well as our dogs, the canines. Part of the opioids money we authorized was for the animals also. So luckily, maybe that also shows how smart we are as a community. And I think Guam has a lot of potential. Everybody on Guam is smart. We integrate very well into the United States when we go to the mainland. We need to build on that education that we keep on coming full circle to. Don't touch meth, don't touch any of these illicit drugs, but more so, if you want instant death, don't touch the fentanyl. Don't touch that stuff. So, yeah, I think that's basically what our position is. Luckily, we don't have to put too much resources into finding fentanyl right now because we're not seeing it like the other states. Thank you.
For those of you who were born late 90s and early 2000s, born here, you won't know this, but in the past, for television viewing audiences, we had to wait like 2 weeks to a month before we saw something on television. So that was the time delay for us just to watch something on TV and we change the channel like this. And so I think it's just a matter of time. You know, fentanyl has made its way here somehow. At least for those 7 accounted for deaths, there's probably more. And it's just a matter of that VCR getting into the ship and coming in to Guam until we see an influx and a greater number of cases with fentanyl. And everyone's saying about fentanyl, it is deadly, more deadly than you could even imagine. And what we're seeing nationwide is that this drug is getting mixed into marijuana, getting mixed into other substances. So you might think that you're, smoking a blunt, but inside that thing is something that's really absolutely about to kill you. And so that's the awareness that we need to make everyone in this room and in the community, be aware of, because fentanyl will kill to a degree that you couldn't even imagine. In terms of how can we prevent it from reaching our community, I don't know that we can. Our law enforcement folks are doing everything they can to already, plug up those holes in, the distribution system. But inevitably, it will permeate that wall. And so we need to be prepared to the extent that we possibly can, that we know that it is coming. It's like preparing for a typhoon. This is a Category 5 drug coming in, and we need to be prepared for that. And better be prepared for it and not need all the preparatory things than not have that preparation. So that's what we need to do to quell the storm of fentanyl.
So as we've heard, fentanyl has made its way to the island, and thankfully, not in the amounts or the dosages and the usage that we've seen nationally. And I'd like to attribute that again to, as the AG said, that we're a little bit smarter than the average fentanyl user. And we hope that that trend keeps up, but we've also seen that fentanyl introduction goes hand in hand with methamphetamine use. And the same methods used to import it are probably used to import methamphetamine are probably used to import fentanyl. One of the dangers of fentanyl is that, the fentanyl that's provided, through the illicit markets is not created in a clinical setting. It's created by a pill presser that does a batch, mixes it up, and presses a pill. So you might have one pill with a real minuscule amount of fentanyl and think, you take that, you're okay. But another pill in that same batch is going to contain, 10 times that amount, and you take that and, you're gone. So, that's something to be aware of, and I think that, that's going to be indicative of an educational campaign that may go hand in hand with the methamphetamine campaign. But, thankfully, we knock on wood, it's going to make its way here eventually in larger numbers. We do everything we can to intercept that, but again, there's a danger not just to the public, but to the law enforcement themselves. We try to mitigate that by establishing Narcan between our offices, through all law enforcement offices, through all public safety folks, first responders, to the schools, whatever you can do to make it available. That's something that we think can mitigate the effects of fentanyl if it becomes widely distributed. And again, I think the education process, because we're still at that low level of usage and we're still finding the low levels here on island, I think that's going to be an important part of keeping it abated.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're ahead of the curve, right? I mean, the rest of the country, they're installing these Narcan vending machines at malls and, outside hospitals. It's so prevalent, it has to be readily available, right? And so we are ahead of the curve, and the legislature did pass laws allowing use of Narcan. I know there's other strategies that we can use, like we have these fentanyl test strips. Of course, it causes a little debate because they're usually used by addicts just to make sure that the substance they're taking does not contain fentanyl. The other thing that I've learned, Guam does face the danger of, I think, going that way of fentanyl. We did have the heroin days right in the 70s and 80s, and that's an opiate-based substance, right? So, God forbid Guam decides to go back down that road, right? That was a real terrible time in our island, right? Anyone who worked for GPD during that time, right, Frank would say it's far more violent and lots of unsolved homicides from the heroin these people. And so fentanyl is an opiate-based substance. Methamphetamine, right, is an upper, right? Opiates are downers. And so, you would think that they're not the same type of drug, but you wouldn't want a downer if you're on, if you want an upper, right? But the other problem with fentanyl is it's highly addictive. So it's kind of like adding sugar to something, a drink to make you want to drink it all the time. So they'll just put it in limits, very small quantities, more for its addictive nature than for the downer effect, right? And so that's going to be the problem once it starts hitting our streets and meth and in marijuana, right? So yeah, we're ahead of the curve, so we should try to do our best to stay there.
Thank you for the question. The tourism Guam legislature acted very quickly in dealing with fentanyl by introducing a number of measures that widen the access and availability of Narcan. And we did this really at the prompting of HSI and the Guam Police Department through Chief Steve Ignacio, basically called some of the senators, myself included, and said, hey, fentanyl is a big deal. A lot of the law enforcement entities in the states have the ability and the authority to administer it when they come across someone who's in the middle of an overdose. And so the legislature again acted quickly, and we passed a measure that not only authorized law enforcement to administer it, but also to increase the availability of it. And this kind of coincided with a lot of the federal efforts that we see nationwide. And so I'm not so sure if we're ahead of the curve or if we did what we needed to do early enough to kind of stem what could have been, much worse. And relative to the 7 fentanyl deaths, I know a couple of those were actually from individuals who were deceased a few years prior to the report, and they were only able to conduct the testing at the time that the medical examiner compiled the report. So, the previous speakers are right, we could have seen more fentanyl deaths that we just don't know about. And I'm just not so confident in, saying, oh, we're good with the fentanyl, because we actually have a lot of people in Guam who are into popping prescription pills. And, primarily it's a lot of the young people, whether it's, they're popping Percocet or Oxycontin, or they're doing a lot of Ritalin. I know is very prevalent among the young people, even, people who aren't prescribed it. And so that's where we run into the danger is, like Mr. Hattori said, is a lot of these dealers, they're sprinkling just a little bit of fentanyl in there to make it that much more addictive. And you're right, you could be popping a Ritalin one day and then pop one the next day and it's laced with fentanyl. And you're one of these people in these videos we see. I don't know if they pop up in your algorithm, but it's a parent talking about how great their kid was and how their kid has a bright future and they never wanted to die, but someone gave them fentanyl and here we are. So yeah, I think it's the undercurrent of people who are using these pills creates for me the opportunity for fentanyl to take grasp. But I think that we did a little bit early on, and so I don't know if if that's why we're not seeing it. But again, the potential for it to wreak havoc is always there. As Mr. Torrey said, meth is the drug of choice, but we have had a history with opiates and heroin. And what I worry about, and this is one of the reasons why we're able to get the Narcan bills passed quickly, I think, is that we have now an overabundance of Cincinnati meth. The meth is just everywhere. It's, depending for who you ask, $20 to $50 a gram. And so I don't know if people are just on meth because it's there. And then if we start to take away the meth, will that then lead to people starting to use more fentanyl? Because I haven't gotten confirmed information about fentanyl laced methamphetamine. I'm gonna tell you, man, a lot of these meth addicts that are GPDs running across, man, I don't know what kind of meth they're on, but they're getting tased. It's not even working anymore. So, right, I know, I've seen multiple magistrates reports where officers tase an individual and they just keep coming, and tase them again, they keep coming. So the product is very pure, and then I think with the potential for them to make it even more addictive with fentanyl, it's really a recipe for disaster. So it's awesome.
Thank you, panelists. Due to the limitation in time, we will now move on to the ninth question. We will start with Attorney General Douglas B. Moynihan. Question number 9. How can Guam build a more sustainable and effective strategy for combating drug problems in the future?
In preparation for this, this came up on our radar at the AG's office, and this is the headline that was part of the Fox News. Oregon reverses course and recriminalizes drug possession. And on Politico, Oregon law rolling back decriminalization takes effect, making possession a crime again. The answer to this question is learn from our history, learn from what worked in the past, and don't relive it again. Oregon tried that grand experiment. Hey, drugs aren't, you shouldn't criminalize drugs because, these people are really good people and they're going through a bad patch of their life. It's the crime victims. Always look to the end of the equation. What does this behavior do to the rest of us, to our friends, our neighbors, our co-students, whatever the case is? That's why Oregon realized that they were trashing their community. Portland, Oregon was one of the worst places to move to because the lack of lawlessness, the lack of lawfulness. So as AG, the role of law enforcement is to, as I said before, to enforce the laws that Senator Barnett passes in the legislature. It's not my public policy, it's your public policy electing the senators. Meth is a crime. Don't treat it anything other than a crime from my perspective, because if I don't prosecute it, who's going to prosecute it? The feds, there are not enough feds on Guam in order to go after the numbers that we're seeing on Guam. So the idea is that that's one way to approach it, and the success of the program will depend upon the numbers and the statistics that are coming out. That's why I'm worried. The boat is swamped right now. It's not like you can fix a person and that they'll never be a meth addict again. So you've got that category. But what about the category that's being created last weekend when someone tried to experiment with meth because it was so cheap? That's another possible criminal. It is a criminal person that's taking it. But I mean, what is that person going to do to the rest of us once they become meth addicted? One of the staff in my office was checking the billboard as he was driving to work. He was driving, and he sees this woman that's holding one of the parts of the billboard, which was the QR code. Goes up to her and says, ma'am, that was part of the billboard. She started to dance in front of him in circles, just dancing with the thing saying that, hey, I don't have my cell phone, my friends are meth addicts. I'm going to take this to them and maybe we can be part of the Dignity Project. It's kind of ironic. It was the Dignity Project QR code that they're dancing around with. So I get a call. What do you want to do to this person? He says, well, just get the QR code plastic back and just let her go on her way. We could have filed a complaint, whatever. So, I don't know, just let her go. And then, so he lets her go. And then 5 minutes later, she's in the middle of the street. And I guess somebody that was driving to work that morning called the police, a cruiser came up and getting her out of the middle of the street as she was dancing around there, and by the way, scratching her face. The meth addicts are delusional. They're coming out, and these guys are seeing it every day. They're delusional, and they need to be separated from us in order to protect us. And what happened to that person at the end of the day? They ended up on the magistrate complaint because the officer had to arrest her because she started to beat up the officer or assault the officer. See, this is the idea of balancing compassion with protecting us from becoming a crime victim in our families and our loved ones, and so forth. So, yeah, it's a work in progress, and I hope that we're able to find a solution as a community with everybody up here. We're a smart community. I know we're smart. All you guys are my classmates, my friends, the leaders in our community. We can find a solution. Thank you.
I think Oregon has proven that decriminalization of drug or substance use didn't work in that community. And I watched a documentary about that before and how they were rolling back the idea to decriminalize drugs. Part of the problem is that they didn't have the end part, which is treatment and, the social services. They just kept distributing clean needles and, putting, here's a safe space to do your drugs. But there was nothing that prevented them from getting to the root of the problem, which was the addiction. So in terms of what is sustainable for our community, number one, we're going back to the education, we're going back to the training, and we're going to collaboration. And that's where all these treatment courts came from. It's a collaboration, an agreement that what we're doing now is not working. And, Colonel and I were just talking on the side here, and we keep thinking that what we're doing, we just keep doing it, we keep going down the road, and keep going down the road, and something will change. That's the definition of insanity, right? Continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So the results now have to be driven by a change in the attitude, a change in how we're doing things. Collaboration starts with perhaps with the first line of defense, which is our law enforcement. When they respond to a call that there's a woman dancing in the middle of the street, what is the idea there? The idea in the beginning of these treatment courts was also a sequential intercept model where law enforcement who were trained in, these are the symptoms of someone with a mental health issue. These are the symptoms of someone with a substance use disorder. And oftentimes you get it to combine. So what do you do then? Do you automatically lock that person up and just hope that they get over it while they're in detention and pre-trial and add it to the 900 other individuals in pre-trial detention? Or do you take them to the service provider? And so that's where that sustainable change in the way things are done can have a real impact on this war on drugs or on how we view the responses to the drug crisis on Guam. And I think that we're already engaged in that now. We have the Office of the Attorney General, the courts, the executive branch, our stakeholders, the defense bar, sitting at tables together in each of these different treatment courts saying, what can be done, what is different, and at the same time going, it didn't work for this person, and so it's, detention, or they are incarcerated, and hopefully while in Department of Corrections, they will get that RSAT treatment. Because you can't, as I think Mr. Ettore said, expect that person to just be detained and then have nothing when they are released. There's nothing to give them a foundation to stay away from the drugs or to make a change. And so thinking that incarceration is a simple solution, we have to make a diversion from that particular train of thought because it hasn't worked with simple incarceration. We need to make a change.
I think I'll take the attack here. So aside from the strong enforcement and looking for programs or applying programs with resources that may be able to assist individuals that are looking for that help, I think there are other aspects to look at, and that might be that what is the purpose of drug distribution? And for the most part, it's financial gain. And that's going to be the purpose between for a lot of crime. And I think, on the federal side, we have a lot of tools available to us, including forfeiture and seizure laws. And that allows us to take away those gains that drug dealers have made when they're selling drugs. I know that there are certain forfeiture and seizure laws available to law enforcement, local law enforcement, but I think that those can be updated maybe to simulate what's available to federal law enforcement so that local law enforcement has that opportunity to take away those toys, to take away that money that the drug users make. That punishes not just not in the detention phase, but also in the benefits phase. A person can go to jail for 10 years for dealing drugs, but if they sell $1 million in the bank when they get out, they lost 10 years, but they still have their money. So, it's something to think about on the local side, maybe incorporating that type of statute where local law enforcement has the ability to pursue those ill-gotten gains.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is recognize that this problem is not just the criminal cases that are charged. I mean, we only get there are 400 arrests, but does that mean there are only 400 people in Guam who are using that? And so there's a certain stigma attached. It is a mental health issue, and we have to treat it like a mental health issue and stop pushing it underground and making our family, do it behind closed doors. And so we can't call them out on it or friends. So, that's a big issue with the billboards is you see those individuals on the billboards and not all meth users look like that. That is not how the typical meth user or meth addict looks like. And so you might be working alongside one. You might have siblings who are using or other family members, and you might just you might just assume they're not because they don't look like that. So this drug problem is a lot bigger than the 180 cases our office got in fiscal year 2024. And as a community, we need to recognize that, right? And so we have to, there's a lot of things that we're doing on our end, like there's this group Toby that's gotten a lot of funding from the opioid crisis, and so that's where a drug does some good. So that's a result of the drug companies, right, encouraging people to get addicted to opioids. So it resulted in this $1 billion settlement. Guam is getting I'm not sure over 10 million, but a lot of that money is being spent on treatment, and so treatment's really gone up over the last I would say since I've been there. A public defender. I know that LRC is going to double their bed space. They're going to create an environment where single mothers with children can also reside at the same time they're receiving treatment. Of course, after they've been detoxed, they're on the road to recovery, right? So they can keep the family together. So I think we have some shining spots that highlights that Guam has done, and that we can continue those and really make treatment available, not just for the people, obviously for the ones who are incarcerated, but also more accessible to the ones we work with who are dealing with addiction issues, or the ones, who are cooking our foods in restaurants and serving our meals, right? So it's a much wider problem than the criminal cases that the AG charges on, and the ones that we represent, and the ones that appear before Judge says it's much wider.
Thank you. I just want to first talk about the recovery resources on Guam. We talk a lot about recovery and treatment. And we have many recovery and treatment options from the adult court to the RSET program at the Department of Corrections. Also New Beginnings, 475-5440. We have Lighthouse Recovery Center. They're opening a women's center, 477-7671. Sanctuary for adolescents who are facing addiction to methamphetamine. You can call 475-7101. Narcotics Anonymous, guamna.org. And Toby Peer Support at 686 And as always, you can call the crisis hotline at 988. When I talk to people who work in treatment and recovery, many of these people are recovered addicts themselves. The biggest problem they face is people who are addicted to crystal methamphetamine not wanting to get the treatment, not wanting to get the recovery, and not wanting to get clean. And so I think if we're going to make a sustainable and effective strategy, we have to address that. And then we've also got to be on the same page. You know, it can't just be GPD waking up in the morning and arresting the street level addicts. It can't just be the Attorney General shouting to the heavens about the dangers of meth. We need all branches of government. The legislature's got to be standing up talking about the dangers of meth and fentanyl to the community to rile up support for more policies. The governor, lieutenant governor, also have to be speaking on methamphetamine and fentanyl more than they are now. And I think if we have all of our branches of government to include partnership from the federal entities, then you know we will be effective. But again, it's like I said at the beginning, if we're kind of doing this, it's not as effective as this if we're trying to knock out the drug epidemic. And so I think that's how we build a more sustainable and effective strategy. Also, we've got to stop normalizing meth usage. I think it's a generational thing. I see some of the comments from here. Some of us, we came up in the scared straight era. Many young people feel like addiction is a disease, and you know that's the end of the conversation. And that any time we're dealing with drugs, we have to deal with it from an angle of compassion, and you know these people are suffering from a disease, which they are. But for me, you know, when you are suffering from a disease and you turn a corner to where now you want to wreak havoc and bring harm upon you know people who are just trying to live their lives, then that's where it becomes for me a criminal problem. And many of the addicts that we're dealing with have already turned that corner and become you know repeat offenders. And you're reading about, really honestly, it's the same 1,000 to 2,000 people addicted to meth who are just in and out of the system. You see it in the news, the rap sheets. They've been doing the same thing for many years. And so I think that we've got to stop normalizing the usage, and we've got to do more to accent the efforts of the Guam Police Department and HSI and everybody who's really targeting the kids. Because you guys know in anything, man, if you want to change something, you got to start when they're young. And these kids, we have to use the methods. I did this malfunction. You know, it's like you take something that is not necessarily entertaining or funny, you make it entertaining, and then it gets digested with the kids. And so I think that we need to look at these things. The kids are under tabs or all over. We need to look at more, you know, messaging and advertising and involving young kids, speaking to kids about the dangers of drugs. And it's not rocket surgery. They do it all over, everywhere. And I just think that for me, when Doc gave her opening remarks and talked about the war on ICE, when you look at the condition and what prompted this forum is we feel like nothing's really changed. And so if we're not doing a war on ICE type of effort where everybody's on the same page and trying to do the same thing, then I really think we're selling our people short. So see those Wasi.
Due to the limitation in time, we will now conclude our forum. Thank you to our panelists for your thoughtful and insightful responses during today's Q&A session. Thank you. Your expertise and candid perspectives have greatly deepened our understanding of the critical issues surrounding Guam's war on drugs. Your contributions have been very special and provided valuable learning opportunities for our students and community. Please give our panelists a round of applause. As we conclude the fall 2024 Criminal Justice Counseling class, I'd like to express our heartfelt gratitude by presenting appreciation certificates to our distinguished panelists as a token of thanks for your time and dedication. We would also like to give a special thanks to the Dean, Dr. Roseanne Jones, President Anita Borja, SVP Dr. Charlene Santos Bamba, and Professor Ronald Huggin and TA Raya King for their support in today's event. We will now proceed with the presentation of certificates. We'll kindly call your names one at a time to invite you to come forward to the middle of the stage where you will be presented certificates by our class chair, Kindred Sidwan, and co-chairs, Valen and Poli. We would like to start with the Guam Police Department, Colonel Joseph Carbolino.
Guam Attorney General Douglas B. Nguyen. HSI Supervisory Special Agent Robert D. Ramirez. Superior Court of Guam Judge Maria Senzo. Guam Public Defender Stephen P. Vittorio. And last but not least, Senator Chris Bryant. Thank you.
Find it one more here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
As we close today's forum with Guam's war on drugs, we gain valuable insights into the complexity of this issue, which affects not only our families and communities, but also our justice system and social services. It's clear that we need a balanced approach, one that combines strong enforcement with effective treatment and addresses the underlying cause of drug abuse, like poverty and mental health. Moving forward, collaboration will be essential. We must strengthen partnerships between law enforcement, healthcare providers, educators, and community groups to create a sustainable solution. This is not just a legal or medical issue. It is a community-wide challenge that requires all of us to be a part of the solution. Let's take the knowledge gained today and turn it into action. By focusing on prevention, supporting recovery, and working together, we can break the cycle of addiction and build a safer, healthier Guam for everyone. Thank you. And before you leave, please take a moment to help us by filling out our post-event survey. Simply scan the QR code above and the questions will appear. Thank you for your participation. At this time, we would like to invite our panelists to the front to take a quick picture with us.